You know what's funny is I clearly remember years and years ago, this was I think 2014, I believe that's when The Witcher 2, or excuse me, The Witcher 3 came out on Xbox One and PlayStation 4, and I did a little video about dynamic resolution and how that was going to be the future and why that was going to be the future and why that was going to be so important. And a lot of people made fun of me and said I didn't know what I was talking about, but again, that's kind of par for the course because everybody makes fun of me and, you know, kind of says those type of things, and I kind of, you know, laugh it off and shake it off because it is what it is. You know, people are going to obviously hate on me regardless of what I do, what I say. Most of them will give me the time to kind of speak to begin with. They already have some kind of opinion formed about me, which is fine. But, you know, and the reason why I said that, you know, dynamic resolution was going to be the future, it was because, you know, if we had, there was already a lot of talk about, you know, getting upgraded consoles and things like that. And I just thought, you know, listen, if you can just leave these things dynamic or unlocked frame rate or an option to do that, when new hardware comes out, you're going to be able to reach those targets even better. And I thought that was very important, especially, and then I kind of revisited that in 2017 when the Xbox One X released, and we saw a lot of, you know, dynamic resolution and things like that. I thought it was a very smart thing to do, and of course it's a very smart thing to do. You know, you don't tie into, you know, lock yourself into a certain resolution. It's going to allow you to do bigger and better things down the road. And just speaking of like game preservation and things like that, it's just a very smart thing to do. Now, when it comes to what Sony is doing with the PlayStation 5, this is a very interesting tactic that they're taking about it, and it does look like indeed we see a lot of what they've kind of been able to accomplish and what they've been able to kind of get out there in terms of this technology. Now, this technology, according to Digital Foundry, which we're going to go over, sounds pretty incredible, you know, and I think it's really cool sounding, and I got to be honest, it's something that is a bit unexpected as well. So to be 100% real with you, I am looking forward to this, and I think that this is something that is obviously going to be very interesting to a lot of people, particularly, you know, I think anybody with any kind of tech expertise or technology or anything like that. I think it's very important to kind of put that out there. So with that being said, I do want to get into it. What's up, everybody? It's the Crap Gamer with you once again. Go ahead and slap that like button for me. Give it a slap or a thumbing, whichever one you prefer. You know, make the most of yourself. That's all I ask for, basically. I do videos and hope that you guys can actually go out there and like some of them. That would be much appreciated for sure. With that being said, fact them up and all that kind of good stuff. Now, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart was looked at by Eurogamer, and they talk about the 40 frames per second support as a potential game changer on a 120 hertz display, because it gives developers more options, which I thought this was really cool, and I wanted to go over this. So a few weeks back, obviously, Insomniac Games patched Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart on PlayStation 5 to introduce a revised version of its 4K 30 fidelity mode, tapping into the capabilities of 120Hz displays. What the team delivered is a potential game changer for console titles. A 40 frames per second mode that looked just as good as the older 30 frames per second offering, but running considerably more smoothly and feeling better to play. On the face of it, a bonus 10 frames per second doesn't sound like a huge bump, but in actuality, it's a very big deal. And now they go on to explain it. They say they need to focus on why console games typically target 30 or 60 frames per second. The reason is simple: consistency. At 60 frames with VSync engaged, as seen in Ratchet's performance modes, the game sends a new image to your display, synchronized with its refresh. That's why 60 frames per second looks so smooth and consistent. The game is matched with the refresh rate of the display. Now, the new frame rate delivered every 16.7 milliseconds. If that's not possible to hit, 30 frames per second is the better bet. By synchronizing the game update with every other screen refresh, you retain that consistency and the sense of fluidity. Each new frame arrives with a consistent 33.3 millisecond update. Now, however, when they go on to explain the 40 frames per second mode, you know, basically on a 60 hertz screen would not look great. New frames would arrive at 16.7 or 33.3 millisecond intervals and look very jerky and inconsistent. That's why 60 frames or 30 are the typical performance targets. So what's so special about Ratchet's new 40 frames per second fidelity mode? Well, moving to a 120 hertz display, the rules change. 40 frames per second in every third refresh on a 120 hertz panel, rather than delivering an uneven 40 frames per second at 16.7 or 3.3, every new frame is delivered at a consistent 25 milliseconds instead. And here's the thing, while 45 frames per second might sound like the midpoint between 30 and 60 in frame time terms, that's not the case. 25 milliseconds sits precisely between 16.7 and 33.3. It's how you might think 45 frames per second should be, but a look at the performance, which they do show, which I'm going to link, and you guys can check that out. And that's why Ratchet & Clank's 40 frames per second mode impresses. Based on what we're seeing from the game, the standard 4K 30 mode runs at maximum resolution with a full suite of visual effects. The 60 frames alternative performance ray tracing mode cuts down resolution dramatically and reduces the density of more packed environments, and also tweaks Ratchet's first simulation. But from what they've seen, it looks like though there's a fair amount of GPU and CPU overhead left over at 4K 30, enough to actually run the game at 4K 40 with only very slight occasional dips in dynamic resolution. Again, dynamic resolution, who would have thought that, right? Oh yeah, I did years ago. Please give me some props. Come on, anybody. Who's going to be the man and just say, hey, Crapgamer is not always wrong. He was right about this, or he was right about that. Like, dang, what's it going to take? Just get out there and just say it, man. Just say it. Say it. Say it. Anyway, yeah. So again, they're really kind of getting into this and talking about it, which I think is incredibly smart thing to do. And not only is it a smart thing to do to kind of talk about this, but also to be able to explain why this is such a thing, and why it's such a impressive idea for the future and things like that. Again, this is why the mode is very impressive, and it does like things with visual effects. The 60 frames alternative obviously is going to cut down on a lot of these things, and obviously with so many things graphically overhead, they're going to be able to do it. So you don't lose any of the game's graphical features or much of the resolution if you opt for 40 frames instead. The cost of buy-in is the 120 hertz display necessary to ensure consistent delivery of new frames every 25 milliseconds. 40 frames per second is significantly faster here, smoother, and there is also input lag benefits too. They tested this by pointing a 240 frames camera at both screens and DualSense controller. They measured the input lag by jumping 10 times and measured the amount of frames between pressing the button and the character beginning the jump animation. The average results and converted frame counts to milliseconds. The end-to-end latency measurements include display lag tested on a 48-inch LG CX in 4K HDR in game mode, and the results are surprising. The game code runs faster, cutting down latency, while at the same time the screen is refreshing more quickly at 120 Hz versus 60, two vectors that drive down the overall end-to-end lag. So there are a couple of takeaways from the testing. The highlights is that on average the 40 frames mode is only 6 milliseconds slower than the 60 frames mode with ray tracing running on a 60 Hz display. If you opt to stick with performance ray tracing mode, but with the game set to 120 output, input lag drops to around 14 milliseconds. Put basically simply, this game feels more responsive and better to play. Meanwhile, running at 30 frames fidelity mode on 60 Hz screen is clearly the least responsive play. So as far as drawbacks or anything like that, they're minimum. To access the 120 Hz mode, dip into the settings in the menu, select 120 Hz, then choose which quality mode you want. You'll need to have 120 Hz output set to automatic on the PlayStation 5. So kind of keep that in mind anytime you do any of this stuff. It's very important to kind of pay attention to what they're offering, and then, you know, conversely actually, you know, turn it on. You know, that's a very important part about all this stuff. So yeah, to be able to do that and to be able to accomplish that, I think is very smart. Just out of the gate, you know, it's going to be something that you're going to want to be able to do. And you know, they really are raving about this as well. Drawbacks are minimum to access it. This, like I said, you got to make sure to turn it on, as otherwise the only downer is those with HDMI 2.0 displays that support 120 frames will be locked to a downscaled 1080p output, even though there is a range of TVs out there that may not have that full HDMI 2.1 support required for 4K 120. So you can still deliver 1440p 120. So that's not Insomniac's fault. It's something Sony seriously needs to consider adding at a system level, along with VRR, which is variable refresh rate support. Discussion of VRR opens up another question, of course. Is a locked 40 frames per second better or worse than unlocking the game completely and letting VRR smooth out the experience? From their perspective, there are pros and cons. First of all, the option of VRR support should be there with PlayStation 5. There's no question about it. However, settling on 40 frames per second gives a set render time for games to target, or dynamic resolution scalers to calibrate against. So basically they're saying this is a very smooth system that they've actually been able to do. And while I do 100% agree that they need to do VRR support very quickly on these games, on the platform, I think that in the meantime, if they can accomplish what they've done with the 120 and the 40 frames per second, I think that would be a very smart move. I'm going to link this in the description below. You guys can all check that out. Let me know what you think. Have a fantastic day. Fact 'em up. Crapgamer out.